So Haribol, again, we're not that many today, but let's begin. Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagra Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Varijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Madhyanati Mirandasya Gyanangyana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Siddhantotpalasaranitya Maham Samvilasatmakam Audaryakya Sudhama Sevakadanam Vishramba Bhakti Pradam Yachna Yukti Vichakshanam Tvagabidu Vaishishta Shaktya Sada Vandeham Tripurari Kayatim Sri Bhakti Vedantinam Manchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratishe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusate Devi Pranamami Haripriye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Nama Eva Kevalam Kalau Nastyeva Gatiranyatha. So welcome again, dear devotees. Welcome Krishna Kumari, Saragrahi, Govinda Mohini, and Taravali. And of course, the others I've already welcomed, but you're all extremely welcome to the last part of this series called Sri Chaitanya's Holy Land, Navadvip Dhama Parikrama. I'm lucky or unlucky, depending on how you see it. My month started in such a way that everybody else almost has 4 parts in their series. I got to have 5 parts. And I thought that this last part, I would do something a little bit different from what I've done so far. Haribol Guru Nishta. In this last part, we're going to go back to some of the places where we've been already, because today the focus will be on the legacy of Srila Saraswati Thakur. I got a question after last lecture. One person asked, it seems like most of the places in Navadvip are connected somehow with the lineage of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. How is this? So today's parikrama will be kind of a history of Mayapur. And hopefully today I will be able to give you kind of an overview of the lineage of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and the legacy of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in Mayapur and Navadvip Dham. So we will begin, dear devotees, with going back to Sri Chaitanya Mat. Sri Chaitanya Mat is the temple founded by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in 1918. He had stayed already in Vrindavan, in Mayapur or Navadvip before that. He had been staying in his father's Svananda Sukhada Kunj in Godrum. He had also been staying at Yogapeeth. But at this time, 1918, he had bought a piece of land that he had identified as the house of Chandrasekharacharya, and non-different from Sri Vrindavan. It was in this place that he founded Chaitanya Math. And this was the heart of his preaching movement. From here, he got up after his sitting for years and doing Harinam, worshipping Sri Sri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari for years. From here, he got up and he started his mission. Now, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was a very powerful person. From our Srila Prabhupada, and to some extent also from Sridhar Maharaj, we got a particular perspective on Srila Saraswati Thakur. The Saraswati Thakur that we got to know, in the past at least, was very much that of the Simha Guru, the Lion Guru, who was so powerful and so scary that when a Mayavadi or somebody else saw him coming on the road, they would quickly go to the other side of the road. Everybody was so scared of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And at least when I was a young man, I found this extremely attractive. He was such a powerful preacher that everybody else ran away. Later on, from Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj, we have gotten a different perspective on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Yes, he could be very strong and powerful and heavy, but he also had an extremely soft heart. And he was prepared to do anything, not only to spread the movement, but also to take care of his disciples. He had thousands of disciples, and he was very attached to his disciples. Out of all of his disciples, there were two that were particularly close to him. And when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati passed away on the 1st of January 1937, when he entered the Nitya Leela, there was some confusion as to how to continue on. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did not really innovate in terms of theology. He very much was his father's son. He taught what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had taught in his books. Nevertheless, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was an innovator when it came to the institution. He created a unique, a new type of institution within Gaudiya Vaishnavism. An institution consisting of mutts or monasteries where celibate men were living, sannyasis and brahmacharis, supported by a congregation of householders. But the leadership came from the sannyasis and acharya, the one central guru, which naturally was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Usually, Gaudiya Vaishnava institutions are centered on families, a particular family that takes care of a particular Shripat or holy place, a temple, and maybe an ashram or something like that. But the person who is in charge will also be the legal owner of the place. So the ownership and being in charge will be something that will be passed down from generation to generation as inheritance, usually to the eldest child or then the children together, or the family as a whole cooperates in running the institution. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, of course, did not have any children, and the idea here was to somehow pass on the movement, not as a householder passes down property, but somehow to appoint a successor. But Bhaktisiddhanta didn't do this very clearly. He wrote a will. He had written a will already previously, some years before, where he appointed 3 trustees. But then this will was superseded by another will. But he didn't say very clearly who is going to be the next acharya, who is going to be the next head, or even if there should be a head like that. He appointed a board of 12 members, a governing body, commission. And this board felt it to be natural that the main task of this board was to elect the next acharya. And there were basically 2 candidates. One of them was Srila Ananta Vasudev Prabhu. Ananta Vasudev was the secretary of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was brahmachari. He was very learned. In many ways, he was like the right hand of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Especially in his old age, whenever Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gave a class, and if he didn't remember a verse or something, he would just look at Vasudev Prabhu and he would immediately supply the verse. He was very much a man of the brahmacharis and the sannyasis. They liked him very much. He had the reputation of being strict. In the picture, he looks a little bit strict as well. But he also had a reputation of being very shastrically learned. So people like Sridhar Maharaj and others, they liked Ananta Vasudev very much. So when the GBC voted, they were originally 12, but Bon Maharaj, who had been a little bit out of the movement for a little while, he came back and they also put him on the GBC, so they voted. And Ananta Vasudev, he got most of the votes. I think he got 8 out of 13 votes. So he became the next leader. Everybody then, after voting, everybody agreed that he will be the next acharya. In Mayapur, he was, they did the acharya abhisheka, and he was appointed the next acharya. Some years later, he took sannyas and became Bhakti Prasad Puri Maharaj. But a few years after that, he gave up his position as acharya. There are different stories about why he did so. He gave up his position as acharya and he got married, which of course for many people was a very shocking thing. The sannyasi gets married. There's a very ugly word for a person like that, vantasi, a person who eats his own vomit. His followers, of course, don't see it like that. They think that this was a leela that he did. They compare it with some other Vaishnavas, even to Nityananda Prabhu. He wanted to show that sannyas is an external thing. He wanted to go deep. And indeed, after he gave up his acharyaship, he moved to Vrindavan. He was known under the name Puri Das. He edited many books of the Goswamis, brought out beautiful editions that he distributed for free before he passed away at a fairly young age. Nevertheless, Ananta Vasudev Prabhu, he was the successor of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But very soon after he was appointed as the Acharya, another party broke away from his leadership. And we will get to that in a little while. The part of the Gaudiya Math that stems from Ananta Vasudeva Prabhu's faction, when this split happens, this first split happens, is the Gaudiya Math known as the Gaudiya Mission, with its headquarters in Bagbazar, the famous marble temple in Bagbazar, is the headquarters of the Gaudiya Mission in and their temple in Navadvip. We visited last time when we went to Godrumdvip, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Gaudiya Math. So after the split, they lost control of the original Math, Chaitanya Math. So instead, they built this temple in the 50s. The one that broke away from the leadership of Ananta Vasudeva was the second of Bhaktisiddhanta's two closest disciples. His name was Kunja Bihari, or Kunja Bihari Vidyabhushan, or his nickname was Kunja Da. You see him here with Bhaktisiddhanta in the same picture. He's often called Prabhupada Preshta, which means the one dearest to Prabhupada. And he very much was the one dearest to Prabhupada. He was a householder and a manager. It was he who convinced Bhaktisiddhanta to get up from his bhajan at Chaitanya Math and come to Kolkata and start the preaching movement. Even though he was a householder, he gave his everything to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was prepared to go to Iraq to work, to make money for the mission when the mission was in financial difficulties. He was prepared to give up the personal association of his guru to make sure that the mission will be able to continue. So Bhaktisiddhanta loved him extremely much, so much so that he even overlooked some of his kind of unfair dealings. He had children that he wanted to make sure the future was safe, so he put them in law school. And he used money from the mission to pay for their university education. When the other members of the Math found out about this, many were very upset, and they went to Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta, to complain. And Bhaktisiddhanta said, "This is not a big deal. He is doing so much for the movement. Let him do this. I don't object at all." So he wasn't so popular with the brahmacharis and sannyasis, but he was very popular with Bhaktisiddhanta and also with the householders. Bhaktisiddhanta in his will said that Kunja Bihari should manage. So Kunja Bihari and his followers, they thought that this meant that he should be the next Acharya. And when Ananta Vasudeva was made Acharya, they objected and they split off, and a lawsuit was instigated between these two factions, the faction of Ananta Vasudeva and the faction of Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari later took sannyas and became known as Bhakti Vilas Tirtha Maharaj. And eventually Chaitanya Math became a part of this faction, the Gaudiya Math, led by Bhakti Vilas Tirtha Maharaj, that had been Kunja Bihari Vidyabhushan. So Chaitanya Math that we visited on the first parikrama, that one is belonging to this faction. So we have two main factions, Chaitanya Math and the Gaudiya Maths, and Gaudiya Mission. So these two are the main factions of the Gaudiya Math. Both can be said to be direct descendants of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's preaching movement. Because the main spiritual center, Chaitanya Math, belongs to one center, and the Bagbasar temple, which was very much the center of the preaching movement, belongs to the other. So both can claim with equal right that they are the original Gaudiya Math. Nevertheless, in time, sannyasis and brahmacharis from both of these sections distanced themselves from these two gurus and began their own movements. And I will tell you a little bit about some of those movements. The first person here is Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, our Param Gurudev. Sridhar Maharaj's Math we already visited. It's in Navadvip. He was one of the first to establish an independent movement, an independent mission in Navadvip Dham. And we know, of course, about him through his lectures, through his writings. He was a great Sanskrit scholar, one of the best Sanskrit scholars among Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples, and also a great poet. And of course, deeply learned in the scriptures, Shastra Nipun. He was very much an independent and even introverted person. But his god brothers would come to him from time to time and ask advice. He had supported Ananta Vasudeva at the beginning, but then when Ananta Vasudeva left his post as Acharya, then Sridhar Maharaj withdrew from the Gaudiya mission and started his own movement. First, in a very, very small way, and then after the passing of our Prabhupada, in a larger way, and eventually in an international way, even though he himself never traveled to the West. Another one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's followers that started an ashram in Navadvip was Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj. As a brahmachari, Keshav Maharaj had been in charge of Chaitanya Math. He had been a temple commander or something like that there. He came from a Jomidari family or a landowner family. So he had kind of from his birth been accustomed to being in charge. He knew how to take control, how to make things happen. He would ride around on a horse and make sure everything. No people tried to encroach on the land and very kind of hands-on management. Eventually, he also started his own movement, and he founded his ashram, the Devananda Gaudiya Math, that we visited as well in Navadvip. This math is the math where the deity of Varahadev is worshipped. And maybe you remember, this was the math where the section of Jnana was the section where you take a bath and go to the toilet. Keshav Maharaj kept some of this fiery side all to the end. He was very strong in preaching and very strong, especially in preaching against Mayavad philosophy. He had many disciples as well. His movement was a dynamic movement, spreading to many parts of India. He is among his disciples, Srila Narayana Maharaj was one. And Narayana Maharaj, of course, also founded eventually his own movement that also has its own temple in Mayapur. So here's just one example of how one disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta founds his own movement, and then a grand disciple founds another movement. This is what has happened to the Gaudiya Math, that it has splintered first into 2, then into 3, then into 16, then into 64, and so on. Which in many ways has been a good thing. It has broadened the different aspects of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and given more and more devotees a chance to step up and take leadership roles and take responsibility and grow in that way. Another of the famous and powerful disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he had so many of them, was Srila Bhaktidayita Madhava Maharaj. Madhava Maharaj was also a powerful preacher. He preached particularly in Assam, to the east of Bengal, north of Bangladesh, but also in Punjab, in almost the opposite side of India, and other places as well, in Kolkata and so on. He founded his ashram in the place called Ishodyan. Ishodyan is, depending on how you read the map of Navadvip, is either in Rudradvip or Mayapur. Today, most people will say that it's in Mayapur. His movement is called the Chaitanya Gaudiya Math. Most of these movements have very similar sounding names, so you need to kind of be an expert to keep them separate from each other. There is Chaitanya Math and the Gaudiya Maths. And then there's Chaitanya Gaudiya Math, which is a different thing. So Chaitanya Gaudiya Math is the movement founded by Srila Bhaktidayita Madhava Maharaj, which has its headquarters in Kolkata, but an important branch here in Mayapur. This is one of the largest temples, one of the largest Gaudiya Math temples in Mayapur. This is the gate that we see here in the picture. If we go inside, we'll see lots of these kind of folkish art. There will be this kind of pictures and statues of different avatars, of different episodes in Gaura Leela. It's actually very, very nice. And as long as you're able to kind of transcend the Western sensibility of what is art and what is sketch, you can actually enjoy it very much. It's done with lots of bhakti, and there's many nice things to be learned from these different pictures. The next person I wanted to mention today is Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. I've written his name here in the same way as I've written the other sannyasi names, just to demonstrate to you Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's naming system. Bhaktisiddhanta's system of giving names to sannyasis, what was that the sannyasi has kind of a surname that is taken from a list of 108 sannyasi names. And then before that, a name that starts with Bhakti and then something else. So we had, for example, Bhaktidayita Madhava, or Bhakti Vilasa Tirtha, or Bhakti Prasada Puri, Bhakti Pragyana Keshava. So when Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu got sannyas from Keshav Maharaj, he received the name Bhakti Vedanta Swami. So his sannyas name is Swami, B.V. Swami. The Gaudiya Mat Sannyas names can also be turned around so that you say Swami at the beginning, Swami Padmanabha. Then you skip the first two parts. So Bhakti Pranaya Padmanabha. You can say Swami Bhakti Pranaya Padmanabha. You can just say Swami Padmanabha. So according to this system, here we have BV, Swami BV, Swami. But Prabhupada thought that Swami BV, Swami sounded kind of redundant. So he didn't usually use that. Instead, he added AC from his previous name at the beginning and just used AC Bhaktivedanta Swami. So he changed it a little bit. And of course, today we usually know him under the honorific title Prabhupada, that some of his godbrothers weren't so happy with him accepting, because of course it was the title of their guru as well. But it was his disciples who wanted to give it to him. And of course, in light of his unprecedented contribution to the spreading of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there's nothing we can complain about. He is Prabhupada to thousands and thousands of people. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. But from the Gaudiya Math perspective, he is Swami Maharaj, or Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, or BV Swami Maharaj. And his movement, of course, we don't need to say so much about. It's famous all around the world. Its headquarters, just like Chaitanya Math and the Gaudiya Maths, is here in Mayapur. The Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, or also known as the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. This is, of course, as it is supposed to look, or almost as it's supposed to look in the future. It's not quite ready yet, but in a few more years they will finish the temple. A huge temple on a completely different scale than all of the other institutions that we have been mentioning. It's maybe 100 times larger than the largest of the other movements in this area. So much so that ISKCON Mayapur has transformed the whole area of Navadvip in so many different ways. Architecturally, in terms of style of dressing the deities, in terms of programs, in terms of economy as well. When ISKCON Mayapur goes buying vegetables or something like that, they will send in trucks and they will empty out the whole marketplace, which is nice for those who are selling, not so nice for the others, because it will, of course, hike up the prices. So ISKCON Mayapur is a very powerful influence in this area. And with this kind of influence, of course, comes many things: responsibility, sometimes also some sides that are maybe not so good. But in general, of course, this is a wonderful movement and a wonderful project that all of the descendants of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati can feel pride in. Eventually, many of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati started their own movements, and many also came back to Mayapur to found a temple or a mutt in this sacred area. We have some mutts in other parts of Navadvip Dham, in Godrumdvip, in Ruddradvip, in Koladvip, and so on. But most wanted to have their mutt in Mayapur, because that's, of course, Antardvip. That's the central area of Navadvip. And it's also the area where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did his own bhajan. One of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta that came back here to Mayapur to found a new temple was Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj. Puri Maharaj had been a brahmachari during the time of Bhaktisiddhanta. He had been involved with the publishing aspect of his Guru Maharaja's mission. He had been the editor of several journals, and he worked together with some of his godbrothers afterwards for decades, until finally then, for different reasons, beginning his own movement. And he lived a very long life. So many of the acharyas today had the opportunity to get his darshan. Even I had his darshan a few times. And he was a very wonderful Vaishnava, sweet, deeply learned, very concerned about preserving the legacy of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Published several books. I like the picture here, not the least because he's so surrounded by books. And it's not just posing. He really lived his life around books from the beginning to the end. He founded his temple in Mayapur, quite close to ISKCON Mayapur. It's called the Gopinatha Gaudiya Math. And you can see the domes of the main temple here. His samadhi is also here by the temple at Gopinatha Gaudiya Math. Another Puri Maharaj also founded a temple here in Mayapur. There are 108 sannyas names, so you can have a lot of different names. There's Audulomi, there is Paramahamsa, there is Paramarthi, there is Vana, Aranya, Sagara, and so on. But some names seem to be more popular than others. And Puri is one of the popular ones. So there are many Puri Maharajas. We had already Bhakti Prasad Puri, and we had Bhakti Pramod Puri. Now we have Bhakti Vaibhava Puri. So sometimes it's important to remember the first part of the name as well, to be able to differentiate these different Mahajans from each other. Bhakti Vaibhava Puri Maharaj was younger than, he was one of the youngest disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He received first initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and then second initiation from one of his successors. But he also eventually founded his own movement. And he also came to the West. Bhakti Vaibhava Puri Maharaj traveled to several Western countries and founded temples in some places as well. There's a beautiful temple managed by his followers outside of Vienna in Austria. And he has followers in many other places as well. Bhakti Vaibhava Puri Maharaj, his temple in Mayapur is very close to ISKCON. It's called the Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mission. And it's just a few hundred meters from the main gate of ISKCON Mayapur. There are so many other disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. In Sridhar Maharaja's song about Mahaprabhu, the one that Guru Maharaj sometimes sings, the last line is Bhakti Shaparshada Prabhupada. And I like that line very much because it glorifies Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati together with his devoted parshadas or his devoted followers. And this is an important thing. Each Vaishnava is never alone, just like Krishna is never alone. Vaishnavas also have their parshadas, their followers. And one of the nice things that I have learned personally through one of our Guru Maharaja's godbrothers is that the Gaudiya Math, even though it's split up into so many different institutions, is nevertheless one family. And it really works like that. if you get to know the etiquette and get to know the language a little bit, you can get to know these different branches of the Gaudiya Math and move between them. The disciples of the different Gaudiya Maths, they do this with a few exceptions. They go to each other's festivals, they go to each other's kirtans, they have their own special conception of Krishna consciousness. They have a little bit different systems than other maths. They may have a little bit different arti songs. Some things might be different. The exact standard for what to eat and what not to eat on Ekadashi or something like that. But they feel themselves as being related to each other, which they are, of course. They all go back to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Sometimes we hear the term Sarasvata Gaudiya Vaishnavas as a name that unites the different descendants of Srila Saraswati Thakur. And here in Navadvip Dham, we can see this very clearly. There are so many different temples connected with Srila Saraswati Thakur through temples that he founded himself, such as the Chaitanya Math, temples founded by his disciples, temples founded by his grand disciples, and even temples founded by his great grand disciples. We don't know what this place will look like in 100 years. Maybe there will be the double the amount of temples that are there right now, or maybe some of the temples will be joined with others. We don't know. But for certain, we know that the current of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati will not disappear from this world, from the simple fact that there's so much spiritual power within it. We see our own Guru Maharaj, who is a very unique manifestation of the mood of Srila Prabhupada and the mood of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and something individual that is different from both of them. And so many other teachers and preceptors within ISKCON, within the different Gaudiya Maths. Yes, some of the Gaudiya Maths are kind of, not so much is happening in them, but in many, many, many things are happening. And when you get to know this family of the Gaudiya Math, you can move around and find inspiration in different places. There's a saying that if you want to find water, it is not a good idea to go around and dig a little bit in the ground in different places. Instead, go to one place and dig deep. And the same is true, of course, with spiritual inspiration. Jumping around from place to place is not always the best idea. It's better to focus in one place, focus on one spiritual master, one institution. But that doesn't mean that we can't still be inspired by God uncles and God cousins and God brothers and sisters. And this is one of the things that I have learned and that I very much appreciate. We can find Gaudiya Vaishnava friends in different movements, and we can find inspiration in different places without losing our fidelity to our own spiritual masters. So I wanted dear devotees to end this series of Sri Chaitanya's Holy Land by glorifying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and all of his disciples for the wonderful things that they have done here in Navadvip Dham and that they are doing all over India and all over the world. We are spread out now in so many different places, in Northern California, in Finland, in South America, and other places. But we have come together, united by our love for our Guru Maharaj and for each other. And we, as a group, are also part of something even larger. The whole current of Sarasvata Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and of course with Gaudiya Vaishnavas in general. So I wanted to glorify Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in this way, through his disciples. If I said something that was incorrect, please forgive me for that. I'm very much indebted to all of you for having given me the chance to take you on parikrama these 5 times here in Navadvip Dham. My prayer is that one day we will meet together in Navadvip Dham, not just virtually like this, but in real life. Gurinishta Prabhu said that that's my secret agenda. It really isn't. I did this because Srila Padmanabh Maharaj wanted me to do it. So I wanted to serve him and you through this series. But definitely, I would love to get the chance to come together in the Holy Dham and be covered with the dust of the Holy Dham, hear the sounds of the Holy Dham, feel the smells of the Holy Dham, have prasadam together with the devotees in the Holy Dham. So this is my prayer that one day in the future, this will be possible. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments today?
Hare Krishna, pranam.
Go.
Thank you for a lovely and educational parikram today. And I just wanted to express my surprise that you did not speak about Srila Bhaktivedanta Von Maharaj. Maybe if you wanted to say something about that.
Well, I didn't, because he didn't found any temple in Navadvip. I wanted to focus on the temples here in Navadvip Dham. One of his disciples did found a temple. It is quite close to Yogapith. It's called Kusumakanana. This person's name was Srila Rasananda Bon Maharaj. He broke away from the movement founded by Bon Maharaj and founded his own movement with its main temple there in Mayapur. So there are many temples like this, but I didn't mention Bon Maharaj because he himself didn't found any temple in Navadvip.
Okay, thank you.
Pranama, Maharaja. Thank you for the lovely class. And just a trivial question, really. I was just wondering if the smaller temple, I think it's the smaller temple of Chaitanya Mayapur, is that the smaller one with the outside? I think there's an outside altar, and you can circumambulate that one. Is that the one? And also, apart from another question, apart from the history of Srila B.V. Swami Prabhupada being in the West, at the same time, were there still the disciples preaching in the East, in India, at the same time? The disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaja still preaching there at the same time? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. As for the first question, I'm not sure which place you are referring to.
Yeah, you did put it up, the picture. It's just called the Chaitanya Mayapur, and it's a smaller white temple with a garden in front of it.
Yes, I think that's the Samadhi of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati.
Okay.
Chaitanya Mat is actually, as an area, it's quite large, and there are many different places there. And one of those is Bhaktisiddhanta's Samadhi. That may be the thing that you're thinking of. There's a beautiful rose garden right in front of it.
Yes, rose garden, yes.
Yeah.
I remember that. Thank you. Just to confirm, thank you. Pranam. Lovely.
Hare Krishna. As for the second question, yes, during Prabhupada's time, so many of his god brothers were preaching powerfully in different parts of India. And that's one reason for why not all of them were able to appreciate him from the beginning, because they were so preoccupied by their own movements and the work that they were doing. So they thought he's an upstart. And they weren't able to see that he was empowered in the way that he was until almost at the end of his life. There's at least one, maybe two disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta still alive in the world at the present moment. One is a Babaji who is living at Chaitanya Mat. I forget his name now. He was a very small child in Bhaktisiddhanta's time. He wasn't initiated, I should correct myself, he wasn't initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta, but he met Bhaktisiddhanta and remembers Bhaktisiddhanta. And I think that Shanta Maharaj, one person who received first initiation from Bhaktisiddhanta, I think he's still alive. I think he's he's not speaking or interacting, but as far as I understand, he's still alive. And there may be some others as well who still remember Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Not many, but a few.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, that's a good point that you raised, that many of his disciples were doing large scale preaching in Prabhupada's times.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Pranam.
Hare Krishna. Dhanyavad.
Pranam. Rigo?
Haribol.
Sorry. Maybe I thought it's a good time to say that probably your prayer will become real very soon, because Padmanabha Maharaj asked Guru Maharaj the blessing to do some parikram, some trip to India with all the devotees, and soon we will start organizing that.
That's wonderful news. That's wonderful news.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Guru Maharaj will not come, but Padmanabha Maharaj. Yeah, but Padmanabha Maharaj will be with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still hoping that Guru Maharaj would come as well, but yeah. Still, that would be wonderful if we could meet together in the Holy Dham.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. I'll start working on it, Guru Nishta says. Yes. Thank you, Guru Nishta Prabhu. So, dear devotees, thank you again for your company during these parikramas. All the best, and let's see each other on the other classes. We're starting a new month from tomorrow, so there will be new exciting classes. I hope to see all of you on many classes in the future. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandhara Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Madhur Mohan Radha Govinda Radha Gopinatha Radha Ramadha Radha Sham Sundara Radha Ramana Radha Gokulananda Radha Madhava Rauji Gopal Nitai Gaur Shri Sarvur Giriraj Ki Jai. Jai Guru Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Saraswata Gaudiya Bhagavat Guru Parampara Ki Jai. Jai Panchatattva Makshi Gaur Hari Ki Jai. Jai Shri Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Jai Ananta Kode Vaishnava Vrind Ki Jai. Jai Bhuvan Mangal Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Jai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo.
Sriman Bhrigupada Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.